Hi everyone, I'm Alister Benn and you're watching Expressive Photography. In this week's video, I want to explore the whole concept of processing fall color images in black and white. Before we dive into that, just one very quick announcement. As many of you know, Adam Gibbs and I are running a workshop together in Spain in January. We've had it full about 4 different times, but we've had another cancellation. Someone can't make it because they can't get the time off work. If you want to come to the north coast of Spain with Adam Gibbs and myself at the end of January 2023, click on the link below and subscribe or register for that workshop. First come, first served as usual. Now back to this week's topic. Surely the whole point of being out in the landscape in the autumn is to enjoy all the amazing autumn colours, from the reds and the yellows and the golds and the whole transformation from summer through into winter. I've been photographing fall colour for 20 odd years and it always energises me. Those warm tones are always so beautiful after a particularly green summer, especially here on the west coast of Scotland. I'm just going to dive quickly into Lightroom. I've got 3 or 4 different examples and I want to go through the whole range of tools that we have at our disposal to turn very pleasant photographs of autumn colour into much more dynamically expressive photographs in black and white. As I wrote in my ebook Luminosity and Contrast a few years ago, those two qualities are incredibly important, and as soon as we introduce colour, we get emotionally very quickly moved by the different colours. So as you can see from my Lightroom catalogue here, we have 4 images that some of them are processed and some of them are not. The middle 2 have been processed, the outside 2 have not been processed. You can tell this hasn't been processed because it's a 3:2 vertical, which is something I don't do very often. And the one on the right here was shot as a square. So let's just dive into the first image here. And I think, this is a slate quarry on the west of Scotland with some nice birch trees reflected, and it's a very straight up photograph. And I think what I want to try and do here is transcend the whole concept of colour. I'm going to crop this straight away. Now, I'm a very intuitive processor. I don't really think too much about what I'm going to do. I just react. So the first thing I wanted to do was crop that down to a 4:5. I've always been a great fan of the medium format aspect ratio. And the first thing I'm going to do is to click on those 4 dots and go into the Adobe color and choose a color filter. Now, I'm sure many of you know, when we used to shoot black and white film, we would use colored filters in front of the lens, typically of different colors, to manipulate and change the way that light was being received by the film. We can replicate that now using digital tools. So if I choose an orange filter, you will see that the yellows get quite bright, same with red, but if I use a blue filter, they're going to get a little darker. So if I'm wanting to create contrast and dynamics, we want to raise the value of those yellows. So I'm going to just click on the orange filter there. The yellow and the orange are going to be very similar. I will use the orange in this particular case, and that has me now a nice simple black and white, but it's not quite dynamic enough for me yet. I can see I've got some clipping in my shadows there, and I am just going to lift those a little. I don't like clipped blacks or highlights for that matter. And the first thing we're going to notice, the first thing I want to explore is how we can influence the black and white photograph by manipulating the temperature and the tint. A lot of people have asked me in the past about black and white processing, and they always wonder why I start with a color photograph. Now, obviously the camera's recording raw color data, but if I make this color, if I cool the image, you can see that we're subduing the luminosity. And if I warm the image, we're actually making the whole image brighter. An awful lot of the light in this photograph is yellowy and warm, so we can have quite a good impact. And you can see by moving that temperature slider and the tint slider, the tint also has an impact. And this is a great opportunity for you to explore feel and personal preference. There is no value that's specific to this that's going to give you the perfect relationship, because every single scene is different, the light is different. So quite quickly, I'm going to dial in a bit of contrast there, because what we're dealing, as soon as we remove color from the scene, luminosity and contrast become so much more important. Creating contrast between the yellow warmer tones, or what were yellow tones, and the other stuff in the frame. Our next big supporter or helper in the processing here is the BW mix. We can zone in on those yellow tones and make them really quite startlingly bright. And that again is introducing more contrast. Once I have lightened those tones, I might want to think about how I can bring down the overall exposure of the rocky areas in the background. So what I'm going to do there is just pull down the mid-tones, which is where most of that rock is living, and then I can just come back in and boost the whites again. I'm actually aiming for full dynamic range in this scene, so I want black blacks and white whites, but just on the inner side of the histogram. I'm not wanting to clip these tones. So quite quickly here we can see that we've created a black and white version of this photograph that has significantly more contrast in it than the original color file. But I don't believe I'm done yet. There's still a little bit more we can do with this image, and I think a radial gradient, so some sort of vignette. You will notice here that I'm using the Command minus or Command plus, or I think that's Alt on a PC, but it's Command on a Mac. And I'm going to pull out my vignette, and then of course we're inverting it to produce a vignette, but you can see how small an area there that's actually going to be free of the vignetting. So what I want to do is make that as big as I possibly can, and that way I'm producing a bigger area that's being unaffected by the vignette. And then I can do Command plus again to make it a little bigger, and I think I'm just going to pull down the exposure a little bit more. I'm going to pull down my highlights in those areas. I'm actually going to pull down the whites in those areas, and I'm going to reduce a bit of clarity and texture and detail. And what that's going to do is just really funnel in the effect exactly into the middle there. There's a little bit of tidying up I would do in Photoshop. I would take this into Photoshop now and clone out that top there. I'll do it very roughly here in Lightroom, but it's going to look like crud, I think. Not too bad. The new cloning tool in Lightroom is much improved. So there we go. We have the first image where we've gone from a fairly pleasant, lovely yellow image to this quite stark, contrasty black and white image where the yellow tones have been massively magnified to make them just so much more vibrant and luminous. And I think we've created some really interesting contrast there. If we move on to this second example, this is a photograph I particularly like actually. I think it's quite quirky. I think by putting the leaves in the front there is creating this very interesting composition. But if we were to look at what we could do with this in black and white, I think we have an opportunity to change the mood, change the feel. Again, the color is so important in these photographs. So let's recreate some of the steps that we started with. So let's look at the choice of filter. And in this case, I think I'm going to go with a red filter. The reason why? Because it feels right. That's as simple as that. I haven't practiced this image beforehand. I'm literally just coming in and working these as I'm going along. So as soon as we go into black and white, we've already got a really striking photograph. I love the feel of it. I think a good composition in color or black and white is going to feel pretty good anyway. But we can come in and we can start exploring the tones. So you can see as I move the orange slider, we start to see where are the orange tones present. How do we want to represent those? So in this case, I'm going to add a little bit to there. Same with the yellow tones. Now you can see how drastically, if we cut the yellow out of this, we're taking so much light out of the scene. And this becomes an incredible opportunity for us to explore all sorts of different ways of expressing ourselves. I'm excited. Hopefully you're enjoying this too. I'm going to look and see there are no blue tones. There's virtually no cool tones in this scene at all. There is a bit of green there, but I'm happy with where that is. Let's go back and explore now what happens if we start to use our temperature. Obviously, if we start to increase the warmth of the image, the whole scene will get brighter. Now, what does that really mean when we're looking at black and white photography? Well, luminosity is directly related to the energy that we will feel in the photograph. By making the energy higher, by making it more bright, we're actually making the scene more vibrant and more expressive of perhaps that energy that we can feel in the autumn. There's a couple of little spots of highlights just starting to pick up there. I'm not going to worry too much about that at this point in time. You'll notice that I haven't yet touched any slider in the basic panel except the temperature. This is how powerful black and white processing can be just using a color filter and the BW mix. We can create huge amounts of contrast without even touching the basic panel or the tone curve. And I think this is a really important learning point that hopefully you can take away with you. Every tool in Lightroom has so much power to change the contrast and the feel of the photographs that you're making. I am going to darken the scene a little and then increase the whites. So this is me just creating a little bit of contrast. My OCD is going to ADD. I can't move forward while I had a little clipping highlight there, so that's got rid of that. So quite quickly we've managed to, and I'm just going to introduce a little bit more luminosity there. Quite quickly we've made a very striking difference to this photograph. It has gone from being a very beautiful color photograph into what I consider to be a very beautiful black and white photograph. We have more contrast in the black and white version than we do in the color version. And part of that is due to the fact that in RGB mode, the main mode that most of us work in RGB, contrast is directly related to color. The more contrast we apply to a photograph, the more saturated the colors are going to get. And we can cross a line of believability where things just get too saturated. The black and white version on the right-hand side has more contrast than the original color version and therefore retains that impactfulness even though we've taken the color away. I think to keep this video a manageable length, we'll finish just with one more example here. And again, this is a straight out of camera photo. You can see this is just the raw file. So we've got a little bit of clipping in the blacks. So the first thing I'm going to do is just lift the exposure or lift the blacks just to get rid of any clipping. I'm a little bit anal about it. It's just the way I am. So this was late in the autumn last year or the year before. So you can see there's a tiny little bit of frost on the leaves here, but these are all fallen oak leaves and there's a few beech leaves in there as well, and a few little strands of old bracken and bits of grass and so forth. But there's a lot of structure here, there's a lot of detail here, and The colours though, brown has never been a particularly exciting colour in landscape photography. I think we think of golds and yellows and oranges, but when they start getting a bit dirty brown, few of us get so excited about it. So let's go in and have a look at what we can do to this photograph to make it come alive. So in this case, I think I'm going to use a red filter, and again, that's just pure feel. But I'm going to approach it in a different way this time. I'm going to start by adding luminosity. So I'm going to start by adding contrast by using more traditional means, using the white slider, increasing the energy again, increasing that sense of using the highlights to create the interest in this photograph. I'm now going to pull down the shadows until I get down near the clipping, I think, and then keep pushing those whites. So what I'm really doing is extending the histogram so that the blacks are really nearly clipping on that side and the whites are very nearly clipping on the other side. As we've done before, we can come in and start looking now at various versions of this scene, and this slider has a massive impact. You can see as we push those warmer tones or pull them back, how the whole scene is changing. So there's so many different versions of this photograph. And if we wanted to, we could start to use our snapshot function to basically say less orange. Or we could have a version that is more orange. So again, using the snapshot function there allows us to create various versions, and you know there's a video that I made some time ago that illustrates the snapshot function. So I'm going to go somewhere, I think I'm going to go at the high end. I think I'm going to create as much of this beautiful contrast as I can. There's some yellows in here and they do have an impact on some of the tones, but not a massive amount. I knew there was some green in there from before. Let's just increase the greens. And I don't think there's many cool tones. There's a little bit on that leaf, but you can see again, we can take off interesting contrast by just pulling down the blues there. So again, I think I'll go in about there. So already we've created an image that's full of lots of interesting contrast. Because this image is so detailed and so contrasty, I may end up adding some clarity, but not globally. I'm actually going to start by reducing some of the contrast in some of the parts of the frame. So again, I'm going to come in with my radial filter, inverted, because I'm wanting to produce a vignette. And I'm actually going to start to diffuse the edges. So I'm going to use the dehaze to reduce the contrast on the outside. I really want to focus the eye in these areas here. These two oak leaves I consider to be the kind of epicenter. So I'm going to reduce contrast and detail, and I may look at, I think I'll darken it. And that way we're really going to start focusing in on the middle of the frame there. And you can see here when I'm moving a slider, I'm not really looking at where I'm moving the slider to, I'm just looking at the image. And by focusing on the image, it really just allows you to understand what the effect is that you're changing. I'm not interested in what the numbers are, I don't matter, I don't really care whether I'm making an extreme adjustment on the panel. I'm only interested in the aesthetic result. I'm wanting contrast in this photograph. So I'm reasonably happy with the way that is beginning to look, but I still believe that there is more interest that I can create in here, and I'm going to use another radial gradient here just in this area, which is the kind of the heart of the image, and I'm going to add some clarity and texture. I'm going to increase the whites right to the point of clipping. I'll use the highlight slider to pull that down just to really maximize the amount of contrast I can get into there. And I think I might even use a brush. Now I'm going to show you something really interesting here, which is I'm going to use a brush and I'm going to paint with warmth. And the upshot of that is if I paint in with warm light, all of the warm filters that I was using in this scene, so all of the things that were creating, adding to the warmth, so the black and white mix, using the orange and the yellow filters, using the white balance globally, if I paint in with warmth, I can actually dodge with yellow light, as it were, and it allows me to paint in even more contrast by just bringing in those nice warm tones. And again, you can just focus. You can see if I paint it in with cool, I'm taking away the contrast. So I'm just going to add a little bit of extra contrast to the overall scene. So we've gone again from a fairly pleasant color image with lots of varying tones to quite a striking black and white here, where we've created contrast that isn't as apparent in the color version. And it just goes to show the amount of power that we have in black and white to vary our tones. It really is the 50 shades of grey or the 256 shades of grey that we can use in black and white photography. This takes us very much back to Ansel Adams' zone system, understanding the role of zones 0 through to 10, understanding that we can use those contrasts and transitions throughout the frame to make images that are really quite dynamic. I'd like to hope in this video that I've managed to demonstrate that autumn, or fall as you call it in the United States, isn't all about vibrant golden colors and using those colors to make images full of energy and power. And you know, they're beautiful and dramatic, of course, but there are other creative alternatives. People, I think, would consider that to be quite an austere little triptych. They are contrasty and vibrant and powerful in their own right. Every one of them started out as a color file. We were using fairly simple tools. We haven't gone into Photoshop. We haven't gone into NYX Silver FX. We've just stayed in Adobe Lightroom. And hopefully you would agree that I think we have 3 pretty decent photographs there. Thank you very much for watching. As always, it's a pleasure to deliver this content to you. If you want to take your photography to the next level, why don't you consider joining the Expressive Photography Forum, a private subscription-only group that I have over on our website there. There's a link at the bottom. Incredible place for expressive photography, an incredible place of discussion and inspiration. So why don't you check that out? Also, can't go for a video without mentioning the fact that the Out of Darkness book is still on the pre-sale and you can grab a copy, and we are still offering free shipping to the United States, the UK and quite a few countries in Europe. We're subsidizing the shipping to try and make the book more affordable for you over there. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Tune in next week for more expressive photography, and I look forward to talking to you again. Bye for now.